Hello, welcome to Chess Amateur Analysis. This is the game of Olafsson of Finland against Fischer in Zurich, 1959. King's Indian defence was employed. Game's notable for a couple of reasons. The one that the book cites as the main reason is that Fischer basically begins losing this game through overconfidence, basically. He gets into trouble and he's basically put on the back foot. Olafsson, however, he tries to win the game prematurely by the 21st move, the knight to square b1, and this basically leads to his downfall. Okay, it's also notable for a couple of other situations and moves. Steinitz questioned a pin, which I will explain when I get to on the eighth move, sorry, in which Olafsson pinned Fischer's knight to his queen without any real sort of reason, really. I mean, just as Steinitz put it, in his eyes, it gave Fischer basically the ability to just kick the bishop around because it was, just up there and not really any pieces around defending it. So let's get underway then. So you can tell this is Olafsson starting because Fischer was only, I think the only game he moved like that was the one against Spassky in '72. So Fischer goes for the King's Indian defence, and there you can see the King's Indian defence taking formation, fianchetto, bishop, knight, and Olafsson, I believe he as a player was known for some fairly unusual openings, making unusual openings. And here we go, we've got the three pawns coming up towards here in typical King's Indian style. And this middle pawn comes down, so what that does is releases that bishop and also attacks some of the centre. And Olafsson, not wasting any time, brings his other knight out into play, and Fischer castles. Castles on the fifth move, so king safety, obviously looking after that, as he always does. And the bishop comes out down here, Olafsson's bishop, because it looks like he's about to do the same. And Fischer pushes the pawn into the central area, into the central theatre. But Olafsson declines this gambit and just moves on, grabbing these two squares here with this pawn. Fischer brings his knight out, queenside knight, and this is the knight pin that apparently Steinitz put a question mark against. There's no real reason to do that in his mind. This knight isn't posing a threat, it's not coming down here. I mean, if it takes that, it can get retaken by that one straight away. If it goes over there, it's going to be in trouble if that knight moves. And in any case, maybe just pushing that pawn up there, Steinitz himself's own rule, maybe that would be just as effective. And possibly that's why he criticised that, because he wasn't using Steinitz's rules, so it must be bad. Okay, so he had a point though, because as you can see, the H pawn has come down, threatening that bishop, so he's got to move it. And Fischer over here looks like he is starting to just decide to employ Steinitz's rule. Maybe this little fracas over here reminded him, so he moves this pawn down, which takes that square away from that knight. And the knight on this side retreats. Fischer's queen comes in, and now he starts pushing his pawns now. Olafsson noticed that he hasn't actually castled yet, and he doesn't really seem to be caring too much about king's safety at the minute. Well, Fischer moves that knight back because he knows what's coming next. That pawn to there, and we have two powers acting on that one square. Olafsson brings his queen out, and the knight comes back into play, being put in the immediate line of fire there. And still Olafsson keeps making these I don't know, I'd say fairly unusual moves compared to some of the games that I've observed so far. Fischer's knight comes down, and that's basically limiting that queen's influence there. It's not going to be able to go there. Not that it would really want to because of that, but can't go there either. And Olafsson actually decides to castle on this side where he's got presently a bit more king safety with the two minor pieces and the queen. Fischer's bishop comes down, light squared bishop making its debut. And Olafsson keeps pushing forward with all his pawns. And Fischer decides to attack this knight. Obviously with the protection of that bishop, he's now not going to be as worried about having to exchange queens. And Olafsson takes, Fischer takes back. Oh, just a sound from the computer there, I had to check it out. Okay, so the bishop takes back, and Olafsson threatens, bishop retreats. And Olafsson's bishop comes down on this side. Fischer pushes his pawn into the c5 square, so he's got two powers acting on that one square in the middle now. Olafsson starts extending this chain of pawns here, and the dark squared bishop comes out. Fischer keeps pushing his pawns down, and Olafsson now making all sorts of moves down here with these minor pieces. Pawn coming down here to attack both of these two pawns, and it's taken, breaking open Olafsson's this open file here. Taken again by this pawn. A little bit of a danger there of a pin if Olafsson was to move his rook across. Olafsson retakes, and Fischer comes down and threatens the queen. Now, this was one of the decisive moments of the game apparently, maybe because it's got that bishop down to a tactical position, but this riposte with the queen basically seemed to really hamper Olafsson. I mean, he can't go to that square there, he can't go to that square. I suppose he could still get out on this diagonal, but hampered nonetheless. Fischer keeps pushing his pawns, and as I was saying, Olafsson has taken the opportunity to get the pin on that bishop there. Now, this is at the expense of this pawn here. Olafsson has decided to pin the bishop. Now, what I've noticed in a lot of Fischer's games is his ability and his tendency even to get past pawns, and he does seem to make life very awkward for his opponents with his passed pawns, and this is a passed pawn right here. So that's down, and Olafsson hasn't capitalised on that, instead choosing to take this, and obviously that bishop being pinned there, he could take that bishop without any fear of recrimination from the king. So Fischer decides to reinforce the bishop there, and inevitably, some might say, the defender of the king is taken, and Fischer retakes. Olafsson retakes, and Fischer retakes finally of his king. This bishop comes up here, leaving that passed pawn to its own devices, and Fischer, instead of taking that outright, he decides to take this pawn here. Check to Fischer's king. Check again. It's a bit awkward that. Check there, check there. That file and that diagonal both check. So there is an exchange of queens. Now, by this stage, Olafsson's time was running out. He was under a lot of time pressure. So it's, in theory, it looks like he's basically scrambling around there for something to do. He could have planned this attack much better if he'd have had the time, but he's basically been forced into exchanging queens when he doesn't really want to do that. So our queens are exchanged, and Down comes another pawn. Olafsson takes Fischer's light squared bishop, and the retake is inevitable. And Olafsson now starts taking Fischer's pawns on this side, maybe hoping to get a pass pawn of his own. And the knight comes across. Knight comes across, threatening this pawn here. The pawn comes down to threaten the rook, which has to move out of the way. Down comes the second of Fischer's two ultimately passed pawns, and he keeps on pressing. Olafsson now completely tied up to these two pawns down here. He's really struggling. Rook comes across, and the king comes up behind these pawns, possibly hoping to get rid of that one, but obviously he can't because he put himself in check. Fischer's knight comes down, the king comes up outside the pawns, and that was where Olafsson resigned, because at least one of these two pawns has got to queen, basically. Once again, Fischer's defeated his opponent using passed pawns, basically. Well, not just passed pawns, but they've been instrumental in his success there.